Hi, and welcome to our midweek Bible study tonight. I'm glad that you're with us. Before we get into our study, one quick announcement. This coming Sunday, August 30th at 6:30 p.m. in the back parking lot, we'll have our fifth Sunday singing. As you know, outside of COVID time, we typically take every fifth Sunday to have a singing on a Sunday night. And so we want to bring that tradition back beginning this coming Sunday night. It'll be 6:30 p.m., back parking lot. The weather is set to be very comfortable. Bring a back chair, maybe a bottle of water if you'd like, and be sure to wear your mask to your seat, but once you get settled in, feel free to remove that mask and we'll sing together. Tonight we conclude chapter 5 of the book of Matthew. Dr. Brannan has worked with us for the last 3 weeks leading up to tonight, leading us in our study of the Sermon on the Mount. At the conclusion of tonight, we'll pick up next week with Mark Hester in Matthew chapter 6. So we invite you to join us back here 7 p.m. next Wednesday as well. Go ahead and grab a Bible, something to take some notes with, and let's begin our study.
Good evening, folks. Wow, how this book has flown by. Here we are at lesson 4, and it seems only yesterday that we started out with lesson 1. If you will, turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5, verse 27, and let's look at 27 through 30, where Christ talks about adultery in the heart. You've heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble or to sin, pluck it out, cast it from you. For it's more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It's more profitable that one of your members should perish than your whole body be cast into hell. Now, Christ is not saying that if you have an evil thought to come into your mind and you quickly close the door on it, that you're guilty of adultery. But he says, whosoever looks on a woman for the purpose of lusting after her. In other words, it's a lustful look. It's a look designed to excite and maybe to partially satisfy lust. Now, we live in a world where everything in our country seems to be sold as sex. And you can't avoid a picture flashing up before you and something coming in without invitation. And remember, Satan and his angels are right on the work, and they're ready to capture your mind any way they can. Now, I remember back over half a century ago, I was teaching along this line in an auditorium class in West Tallahassee. Had a good friend there, Reggie Anthony, who is 1 year to the day younger than I, that we have been lifetime friends until he passed away some 3 or 4 years ago. But I knew I could always ask him a question. He would give me an answer. And so I said, "Now, Reggie, can you keep evil thoughts from ever entering your mind?" And he said, "Well, no." And I said, "What do you do about it?" And I thought his answer was classic. He said, "You just hustle them right on out." Well, somewhere when I was still a young man, probably from some preacher, I heard the saying that you can't keep a buzzard from flying over your head, but you can keep him from building a nest in your hair. And so one of these evil thoughts come in and get it right on out of your mind. Now, I have 4 suggestions as to how you can keep more and more of these evil thoughts from ever entering your mind. Number 1, don't fill up your memory bank with salacious pictures or thoughts or words, mental observations. And that means we've got to avoid any materials that are going to be lust-exciting materials. You know, the internet with its porn sites has become one of the greatest destroyers of pure thinking that has ever come along. There have always been materials, but I remember when those girly magazines, as they call them, first began to be printed, you had to go to what was called the red light district in order to buy one in these so-called adult bookstores. Later they came into the drugstore, but they were in a brown envelope. And then now, look how these things are found everywhere, except when the pornographic industry was developed on the internet, why then a lot of these magazines were put out of business. I understand a lot of these romance novels that are so popular today have the seamy scenes described in them. Well, that's got to be avoided if we're going to keep our mind from having these impure thoughts to enter into them. Now, sometimes, and fortunately, out of the problems in the workplace, this has been harder to do, but used to be that a foul-mouthed and a foul-thinking man in the office could really foul up the air. And there you are working with him, and he chooses to try to foul up everyone's mind. I was speaking on this at a chapel service at the Freed Hardeman lectures one year. And then I said, I don't know, but you've got to some way find a way out of this. And I said, and I'll tell you how one man did it. He's a roommate of mine, Lester Starling. Lester was 80% blind, legally blind. But when World War II came on, why, they hired men for all kinds of jobs. And Lester got a job decking and then roofing houses. For this housing the government had to put up for these workers coming in to work in the munitions and the military equipment manufacturing companies that were set up all over the country. Well, Lester up on the roof with 3 other men, one of them just loved to come up with all of these smutty stories, and they learned that Lester was wanting to be a preacher, and they just poured him out. And Lester said, please, fellows, don't do this. If you're going to talk that way, do it when I'm not around. And they said, oh, shut up, Starlet. You need to learn what the real world's all about. Well, Lester went home, prayed about it, thought about it, came back the next day. They started in that, and he had a loud voice. He just reared back and began singing, there's a great day coming, a great day coming, a great day coming by and by. And some over on the other house shouted over, you fellows having a prayer meeting over there? And that's the last thing in the world the others wanted. They said, shut up, Starlet, shut up. When he finished verse 1, he said, now you want to hear verse 2? And so for 2 or 3 days, things were quiet. After that, they started in again, and Lester poured in on verse 3. There's a sad day coming, a sad day coming, when the saints and the sinners shall be parted right and left. Are you ready for that day to come? Well, that shut him up for the rest of his time. But when I spoke on that at Freed Hardeman, I saw a young lady about halfway down the audience come out and come down and came up on the stage smiling. And she said, Lester Starling is my daddy. And she was so proud that her dad had stood up. But you've got to find a way that you don't fill your mind with all of this trash that Satan has such a ready supply that he can pour in and when you don't want it. And those who foul their mouths up with pornographic materials, if they want to live right, are going to have to fight that the rest of their lives. So, number 1, don't fill up your bank there. And then number 2, be busy doing good works. You know, there's a saying that the idle brain is the devil's workshop. And remember, it was David's time of idleness that he got into trouble with Bathsheba. Normally, he led the armies out for the battle, but this particular time, he stayed back and sent Joab with the army. And that's when inadvertently is up on the roof, saw Bathsheba, and then you know the following story. Clouded up and made miserable much of the rest of his life as his own family had murder within, brother murdering brother, and terrible time in his life. And so he had a lot of problems following that. So keep busy doing good things. Then you don't have as much leisure time for this thinking when those might pop into your mind. And then the third suggestion is fill your mind with good thoughts. Now read carefully Philippians 4 and verse 8. Paul said, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things of good report, if there is any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. And so when our meditations are on good things, we don't have time for those evil thoughts to creep in. And David's prayer was, Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer, Psalms 19:14. And so fill your mind with good thoughts. And then number 4, pray. Christ in his model prayer said, pray, Father, lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from the evil one. And when Christ was about to go out to be alone with his Lord, his Father, he told the apostles, and they were feeling pretty proud. Peter said, I'll go with you to death. Jesus said, now watch and pray that you enter not into temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so by following those directions, we can keep these opportunities for Satan to cloud up our mind at a very minimum. Now Jesus said if those things come in, get rid of them. And he uses a hyperbole when he talks about plucking at your eye, cutting off your hand. Just like he used hyperbole when he told the scribes, you are hypocrites, you strain out the net and swallow the camel. But there was one church father, Origen, who was quite popular in the East back in the 2nd or 3rd century, beginning of the 3rd century. And he actually had a physical operation in trying to reduce this sex drive and this evil thinking, and he still was unable to do so. So be sure that you keep your mind pure. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And Christ said, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life. So we've got to keep our hearts clean. And then he talks about the sacred union. Here beginning in verse 31. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Now, Christianity was born into an evil world. 3 great influences on the church were the Greeks, the Romans, and the Jews. Now, the Greeks had a double standard regarding marriage. They wanted the bloodline to be pure, so they took their wives, kept them in seclusion, where a wife was not allowed to be out in public without another family member with her, whether she could not be in a room socializing with men and women, and she could not even eat at a table with men unless her husband was there. But on the other hand, the husband felt very free to have his young courtesan for his sexual pleasure or to go with him to his various functions. So it was a showpiece for it. And they kept the wives by one standard, the men lived by another standard. Well, Rome during the early days, during what is known as the Roman Republic, lasted about 500 years, had great value placed on the throne, on the home. They, in fact, regarded the home as the very solid foundation of the nation, and of course, that is the way it is. But then it came that when they conquered Rome in the 2nd century, things changed. And while they conquered Rome militarily and governmentally and territorially, conquered Greece, the Greeks conquered them in their social and in their moral life. And so the Romans took on the Greek standards of morality. Now there's one difference. The Romans allowed the women to have free course too, and they had much the same freedoms as the men. And the women used that very frequently. Seneca, one of the writers, said that there are women that married to be divorced, divorced to be married. One is mentioned that had 8 husbands in 5 years. Another who was said to count the events in her life not by the consuls but by what husband she had during that particular time. Now, among the Jews, there were 2 schools of thought, one by Hillel and one by Shimei. Hillel was the liberal one, and he is the one that said, for any cause, or if you, under the old law, if a man puts away his wife and let him give her for finding fault in her, if he gives her a certificate of divorcement, and this for any cause, they said, well, what is any cause? Some define any cause as if she burns his meal, or if she talks in a bad way about his kinsman, or if she is one that her voice can be heard outside the house as she talks to her husband. Well, some were just more honest about it. There's a Rabbi Akiba said that a man may divorce his wife if he finds another that is more delightful, more pretty, more sociable than she, then he can put her away. And so you have that particular view followed by Hillel. But on the other hand, Shimei and his fathers were very strict, and he said that the only cause is for the cause of adultery. Well, Jesus explains his position even more in Matthew 19, when they came to him and said, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for any cause? And Jesus said, have you not read that from the beginning God made them male and female and made them one flesh, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife? They said, well, why then did Moses give a command for adultery, or command them to put away their wives, give her writing of divorcement? And Jesus said, well, from the beginning it was not so. But he made them male and female, made them one flesh, and for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. And he says, I say unto you that whoever puts away his wife, except for marital infidelity, and marries another, commits adultery. And whoever marries her that's put away commits adultery. Well, this was what they called a hard saying, and many today find it a hard saying. But this is what Jesus said, and anything beyond that, if one interprets it differently, well, then he has to have something that he's willing to stand before his God and give an account for his interpretation and for his life according to that. But continuing, Jesus, and let me mention one other thing. In Malachi 2:16, written about 400 years before Christ, Malachi quotes God as saying, I hate divorce. I'll tell you, I know at least 5 reasons why God hates divorce. Number 1, it violates his original purpose. Number 2, it gives a sense of failure to the man and the woman that are involved in the divorce. And number 3, and this can be a terrible one, it causes so much damage to the children. I hear a lot about, oh, this is a friendly divorce, the children don't mind, and so forth. But let me tell you, there was one time in my life when I was 13 years old. My dad at that time had a terrible drinking problem. And my mom said one day, I guess I'll just have to divorce him. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, Mama, you can't divorce him. He hasn't committed adultery. And she said, I don't know what he's done. I went into the bathroom and I cried for 2 hours. Fortunately, she didn't go through with it. And later my dad quit his drinking, smoking, and during the last 17 years of his life was an elder of the church at the Chisholm Church in Montgomery. But I know what it did to me as a child, just the mention of it. And said, don't kid yourself that the children are not affected by it. Then the 4th reason I think about what it does to the church, that it helps destroy the strength of the church. And then what it does, number 5, to the nation. Because the home is the foundation of the nation. And when the home ceases to be solid, the nation will cease to be solid. In Matthew 5:33, Jesus is saying, you let your word be your bond. He said, you have heard that it has been said by them of old time, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform unto the Lord your oath. He said, but I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it's the throne of God, nor by the earth, it's its footstool, nor by your head, because you can't make one hair white or black. But let your yea be yea, and your nay be nay, and what is more than this is of the evil one. You know, I had an experience when, again, I was 14 years old, that has blessed me the rest of my life. At this time, I was a student down at Dasher Bible School, now the Georgia Christian Academy. And when I got there, I wanted to blend in, and everything was a cotton picker. We lived in a cotton-picking dormitory. We ate in a cotton-picking dining hall. And sometimes we had cotton-picking meals. Fortunately, they never referred to the faculty or administration as cotton pickers. But one day I had to work, every day I had to work to help pay my expenses, but I was working one day with the son of the superintendent. W.O. Norton was a superintendent. This was his son, Alden, and he was also one of my teachers. And we were out chopping these pine roots, ladder knots as we call them. And if you've ever tried to chop one of them, you know how hard they are, and they make wonderful kindling. But I came down with my axe and sort of struck it a glancing blow, and it wrenched out of my hands and went whirling right over the Alden's head. And that greatly embarrassed me. And I said, that cotton-picking axe. Alden didn't say anything. He just quietly walked over and picked up the axe and brought it back. And he said, Eulie, what kind of axe did you say? What'd you say? I said, that axe? But what kind of axe? I said, cotton picking. And he said, you're mistaken. So look here, Stanley. And you can imagine my face was about like a red light flashing. But he said, let me tell you something. You're new here. I know that everything is a cotton picker, but if you never pick that word up, if you just let your yea be yea, your yes be yes, your no be no, you'll be better off. And you know, since that day, I have not picked up slang words. The English language has over 200,000 words, plenty to have good speech without using these slang words. And then I've never used what Floyd Decker used to call sissy cursing. You don't say damn, but you say darn. You don't say God, but you say gosh. And then others that he called sissy cursing. Well, That's never been a part of my speech. And I say yea, and nay, nay. And you know, when one says to me, I'm telling you the truth, I swear I'm telling you the truth, I really wonder if he's been doubted or why he has to give that affirmation. And you know, thing about it, they not only were swearing about everything in his day, but they also had all kinds of dodges. And you know, Jesus mentions this in Matthew 23. You say that if a man swear by the temple, it's nothing. But if he swear by the gold of the temple, then he's got to keep his word. And he said, you hypocrites, which is greater, the gold of the temple or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And then he said, you say that whoever swears by the altar, it's nothing. But if he swears by the gift on the altar, then he's got to perform what he promised. And Jesus said, you hypocrites, which is greater, the altar that sanctifies the sacrifice or the sacrifice? So they had all kinds of dodges to try to escape this. And when they swore something, you had to be very careful that they used the right wording or they would not consider it to be that. But if we just keep our yes and our no, no, well, then we will be much better off. But then he said regarding the care that we have, he said, you've heard that it was said that thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. Or first of all, before that, he says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, this is an old law. And actually, this old law was given in order to prevent something worse. Instead of, if he had not said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, one may have put out an eye and the other and said, I'm going to kill you for it. But no, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And this was never for personal vengeance. It's a legal type punishment. And the Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest codes, had that in it, that if you hit a patrician, knock out his eye, your eye is going to be knocked out. Knock out his tooth, your tooth's going to be knocked out, and so forth. You know, the Martins and the McCoys, back in the 1800s, had their problems, and it's reported that one of the Martins accused a McCoy boy of stealing one of his pigs. Now, if they had settled it there, well, I said, here, take one of my pigs. That would have ended it. But instead, the feud spurred up, got worse and worse, and to the point that over 100 years, anywhere from 20 in estimates, 20 to 100 had died in the feud. And then in 1903, they signed a formal agreement that brought it legally to an end. But we need to return good for evil. Jesus said, you're instead of this eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, well, then you're to give him good for evil. And don't pay back evil with evil. And then he said, if a man compels you to go with him a mile, go with him too. Now, Palestine was under Roman rule. A soldier could say to any Jew, here's my pack, carry it a mile. Jesus said, carry it two. Carry it one for him and then carry it one for me, as it were. I knew a young couple when they first married, and we were friends, and they wanted to finish their apartment just as cheaply as possible. And so Lynn and Mary Faye looked in the paper, saw this ad of a kitchen table with 4 chairs for $125. They went to look at it, and after they saw it, they went off to the corner and talked and came back and said to the lady that was selling it, is this your asking price, $125? And she said, well, what I got from my furniture is what I've got to live on, and maybe I could drop it to $120. And Lynn said, you don't understand. We feel like if this is worth more than this, we're going to give you $150 for it. Reckon how many times that was told through the years. This young couple actually raised the price $25 and gave it to me. But that second mile service, do more than is required of you. And then Jesus said, you've heard it said, you'll love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Jesus said, you love your enemies and you pray for those that despitefully use you and persecute you. Well, why do this? He said that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven, who makes the sun to rise on the good and the evil, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. He said, if you love those that love you, what do you more than others? Even the tax collectors do that. And so we've got to do more than is the general standard by which most people go by. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. If you want me to love you, love me. But Christ says you love those that don't love you. Well, now how can I love Putin against our country and all of that? Well, and feel toward him like I feel toward my family. Well, you can't, and nor is that required. Because of different words in the Greek, there's one word that for family love, phileo, and brotherly love, phileo, and storge, only your family love, and then there's agape. And this is the kind of love we're to have, that regardless of what others do, you do what you know is best for them. And maybe turn them in, send them to jail. That may be best for them. But you don't do as they do, but you do as you know is best for them. And that kind of love is what Christ says. And then he ends this with a statement, you therefore shall be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. I've heard various explanations of that. Someone said, well, the word perfect means complete. You are to be complete like He's. Well, who of us can be complete like God? I believe He says just what He means, be perfect like God. Well, how can that be? Well, this perfect standard that Jesus has given that none of us can keep all the time is one that, number one, gives us something to strive to. And number two, eliminates any cause for pride on our part. And then number three, makes us realize how desperately we need the grace and the mercy of God. And only with this formula can we ever expect to be as perfect as God, that is, as sin-free as He has. And what can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Well, I appreciate these 2 hours we've been able to spend together over the last 4 weeks. I know it's been very enjoyable for me, very profitable for me. And remember, I've had to skip over a lot of this because of time from my study notes. But if you go online, and Jason will be showing that website where you can go online and get a complete copy of all of my notes, some 36 pages of them, and then study those in private. But next week, we'll look forward to hearing Mark. And until then, God bless you. And now let us close with prayer. Father, thank you for these opportunities of studying your word together. May your word, as the lamp to our feet and a light in our pathway, be our constant companion as we want to walk closer and closer in the steps of our Lord. Keep us this week, keep us close to you, and save us eternally when this life is over. We ask in Jesus' name, amen. God bless.